all in on this trans indoctrination. I mean, would you be opposed to them teaching your daughter and giving her, the ability to change without notifying you?
Absolutely not. But first of all, the Biden administration is not in on trans indoctrination. No one, I would not want anyone giving my child puberty blockers without consulting me. But if you want to live in Ron DeSantis's Florida, and there are a lot of people who do want to, but the reason that it will not be such a cakewalk as many Republicans think is they're doing things like this. Like if you are a teacher in Manatee County, Florida, you now are not allowed to choose the books in your own libraries. It has to go through a media literacy person or librarian for them to choose. There are teachers now who are having to cover up or remove all of the books that they have hand-selected for their classrooms because of this assault by the government of Florida.
Bill, they ensured that all districts understood that not just the school, library, or media center was what they were implying, it's this portion too. We had not incorporated that at the beginning of the school year. So now that we knew that, all of our media specialists were trained, and now we're going through the process and procedure of those personal books, personal items that teachers may have in their classroom that we've not checked to make sure they comply with the statute. So you are correct. We have not had a process. Now, the books that we've bought, but that's not always in every situation what is comprised of that teacher individual libraries in their classroom.
So if we had a process in place previously, unfortunately, we did find some books, I remember last fall and maybe in the summer, that were not appropriate. I'm not trying to explain, but they slipped through the cracks. Is that a good analogy? They slipped through the cracks, or how did
There were some books discovered that are not in compliance with the current statute. That is correct.
Okay. But we're looking at them, we're taking input from the public, and we are methodically, but
Yes.
efficiently making sure that those books are not in our libraries. Okay.
That is correct.
So we've had a library policy in place. Maybe some weeds got into the garden, and so we now have to go weed the library garden, so to speak, and we're putting a new policy in place so that classrooms can also be vetted to make sure that they're in compliance with the law. Was that a good summary?
That is correct. And
Now, could you go through us quickly how, if Mr. Teitelbaum tells the story and he tells it to Mr. Dye and Mr. Dye tells it to me, by the time it gets over to you, it's going to be a little different, most probably, no matter how truthfully we try and tell the story. So what happened last week you met with the principals, I assume, and whatever you told them, somehow they thought that, some of them thought, and maybe it's an exaggeration, but what they needed to do was take a blanket and put it over their books or something because they, for whatever reason, felt concerned that that's what had to be done. So could you help us understand the process that you used to disseminate this information, and then kind of a summary of what you told them, and then what the principals maybe did or didn't? And I guess you don't know what the principals said, but I'm just curious about how it got from here's the guidance from the superintendent to I have to take a blanket and put it over my books, and why maybe some teachers thought that. So go ahead.
well, I think everybody wants to be in compliance with the law.
Okay.
So the information providing today in the workshop and the board was very similar. The slides were a little bit longer, but this is the information that was shared at the principal meeting. Very similar to what was shared with the media specialist training.
Okay.
But I think when you go back and you're conveying to your staff and your teachers, and they may have books that have not been vetted, I think everyone's going to determine how best to address that until they can be in compliance. So we know that many teachers out of their bookshelves have books that are already in Destiny that have already been approved. But is it going to take time for to figure out which one of these did I buy, which one of these were bought with the district money? That does take a little bit of time. We're in the middle of a school year, they're teaching. So I think in many, and I can't say what their thought or talking points, but they're saying, hey, right now I don't know if all these are in compliance. I'm gonna just shield them till I can get to that item to make sure it's taken care of.
So
I would say that is what happened in some of those occurrences.
So it wasn't a direction from you that said, you will cover up your books or turn them
Did
around to the wall?
myself or Lori or anybody say ban all the books, remove all the books, cover every book? No, we said we need to have a procedure to make sure that you do not have any books on your shelves that have not been properly vetted or allowable. So get with Lori. We have 500 volunteers if you need them. I will tell you, I've been to some elementary schools this week. They've already brought their volunteers in. Some of this has already been taken care of. It's done. All the books are on the shelf. There's no issue. Some only have books that have been bought from the district. If that's the case, none of that should be covered. It's all fine. It's what they have that could be personal items that, if they're not already approved, need to be approved before they're giving access to children
Okay.
per the statute.
So what I think I heard you say is there was no direction given to cover books, turn them around to the wall, put them in boxes, or hide them. However, it was explained to them what the requirements of the law are and what procedures are being implemented to make sure that we're in compliance with the law. Some teachers may have chosen to turn books around, to cover them, put them in boxes because they were concerned that maybe they inherited a collection from a previous teacher, and here's the law and here's the penalty, which is a third-degree felony apparently. And so they made their own individual decisions to put books in boxes, cover them or whatever. But there was no direction from the school system to tell them to do that.
We're communicating what the statute said,
Right.
what we need to do, how we can help them, but they are responsible for the items in their classroom that they're giving access to children. So if it's not been vetted, they're not familiar with the books, how they address that was up to the individual or the school principal, et cetera.
Okay, great. And then, thank you for your time. I just do have a few questions, so guess what? That's why we're here. Okay, so we did not order people to turn books around, cover them, and that kind of stuff. One point I wanted to make, just for the general public too, is that we're talking about public school libraries here as opposed to a public library. And in my mind, a public school library is oriented towards minors. So we should all keep that in mind when we're talking about the guidelines and the laws that are applicable here, that this is not a public library where it's open to the public in general, where adults can make decisions in theory about whether their children have access to a public library. These are materials that are oriented towards minors. And so the law is, we saw what part of the law says, and that's a big distinction I think that we just need to keep in mind. These materials that we're talking about here are oriented towards minors. It's not just open to the general public at large. So did want to make that point. And then, and we still can, so how are we sure at this point that all of our library books, have we gone through all of our media center material? Because again, we found some weeds in the garden, but are we pretty sure there are no more weeds in the garden in our libraries at this point? Which also includes any kind of videos or magazines, so the libraries the garden has been weeded, and now we're going into the classrooms and trying to weed those gardens, so to speak. And I hope that analogy isn't offensive to anybody, but that's the best one that comes to my mind. So, okay, great.
That is correct.
That's all the questions I had. Thank you very much.
Not a lot of this stuff should have ever gotten in there. How it got in there, it was infiltrated slowly, I think, and now we have to do this basic mass exodus of all of this material, which I'm glad we're gonna do.
There's a bottleneck there, is my point.
Yes.
It's not, oh, I have a questionable thing, because like I said, I don't think that is a large issue. To use Mr. Tatum's analogy of weeds, I think that seems to be the most appropriate analogy I have heard. I've also heard the words mass exodus. I guess my question is, on Friday, I'd like a percentage. I'd like a percentage of how many books out of the millions I'm going to perceive that we have, because I did some math and it's probably in the millions, that would be my guess, of books that we have now, cataloged, maybe not all cataloged. I would like to know a percentage of how many have been to be inappropriate. I would like that on Friday, if you can, because is it weeds or is it a mass exodus? I think that frame of reference would be helpful to me, and probably
We spent this last year looking for and talking about transparency and debating what is right and ethical. Teachers and parents were divided, confused, and emotional. Together, we all had to deal with a situation that had many interpretations. In order to address the confusion, emotions, and narrow the divide between the parents, teachers, and school districts, the state stepped in to give guidelines in hope of clarity. Clarity is the only answer to confusion and chaos. During the last meeting, Mr. Tatum asked for clarification in multiple ways to a memo that was sent out to principals. On January 23rd, a memo was sent out to all principals by Dr. Lori Breslin addressing the state's new media training and district instructions for adhering to the law. Mr. Tatum asked multiple times, was there a memo sent out by the district to principals that instructed teachers to cover their books? The continuous reply to Mr. Tatum's request for clarification was no. The district did not tell the principals to instruct their teachers to cover their books. This is what was said.
Direction from you that said you will cover up your books or turn them around to the wall.
Myself or Lori or anybody say ban all the books, remove all the books, cover every book. No, we said we need to have a procedure.
In fact, the memo does state in the very first line, remove or cover all materials that have not been vetted. I think this instruction is pretty clear and does not need interpretation. So what is the reason for this inaccurate statement? The excuse cannot be that they did not know what was in the memo, and Dr. Breslin could have corrected the statement at the meeting. I want to apologize to all the teachers for any words indicated that you were over the top, out of line, or fabricated stories. You were only doing what you were told or instructed to do. As things are contentious and clarity is asked by the people in charge and responsible, and as I stand here backing the district on a job well done, I hate to say I feel we were all misled. What other conclusion can we come to? Again, I want to apologize to all the teachers who are trying to do their job and complying with the law and within the instructions you were given. You have every right to be mad and upset. Misinformation is what widened and opened the wound between the parents and the teachers. We are working on closing them. I hope this can be clarified. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes.
Were there a better way that could have been done? Probably. When you look back at any change, you find ways that you can improve upon that implementation. I was asked, mentioned earlier in public comment, and let me just be very clear, it is not my place to get involved in a conversation between the board and my superintendent. And at the same time, I do reflect and I do take responsibility for any pain and stress that our schools, my job is to keep the focus on learning. Well, that failed this week. So, but at the same time, I pride myself on my professional reputation. And no job is worth that, being bashed unnecessarily. And so I'll just leave it at that.
Presentation. Dr. Breslin, first I'd like to tell you that in my interactions with you professionally, I've had nothing but good interactions with you, and I find you to be intelligent and professional. And in my mind, your reputation has not in any way been degraded by what happened, with the realization that maybe what happened last Tuesday amongst all of us could have been handled a little bit better. But we'll talk about that a little later. So I just want to go to the whole issue of what happened back on Tuesday. Ms. Means, did you get my email to ask you that had a document to put up? Can you pop it up real quick if you would? So I just wanted to show everyone what the guidance was that went out on Tuesday, or whenever that went out. And the reason I'm doing this is because this is beyond the books right now, it's about the public trust basically. And so I'm up here, so at least this is my opinion for the board, did not handle this in the best way that we possibly could, because what happened at that meeting was statements were made that the the system, so to speak, did not tell the teachers to cover up their books or to remove them, and yet clearly that was the verbal guidance that was given. And so, when the public trust comes up, when we say something like that, and then it's brought to light that, well, that's actually not what happened, and I'm not implying any bad intentions by anybody. I will make the point that Ms. Saunders, within 24 hours, did bring to my attention the fact that, well, actually, we did put out some written guidance, and maybe you weren't aware of it at the time because the two of you hadn't communicated behind the scenes or whatever. So I'm just making the point that there was some public trust we could have done a better job maintaining the public trust there. And it doesn't reflect poorly on you personally or anybody. It's that we could have done better in general.
Well, actually, Mr. Tatum, I'm the one that made that statement, and I think probably, and I hope we clarified it some, part of it is and this was all done very quickly, should have put a caveat. A teacher library really are intended to be materials that are purchased by the district. Those do not have to be covered. They've already been vetted. They're accessible. They do not have to be removed.
Right.
The materials in question are those that are personal items that were bought by a teacher on shelves in their classroom. And if they have not been vetted per the statute, they cannot be accessible until so. So in part, I think it was terminology. We didn't specify it correctly. And I am the person that made that statement, so I do apologize if it was conveyed incorrectly.
Okay, great. And just as a lesson to be learned, right? And then I'd also like to some degree, it's the first time that I've ever heard somebody come up in public comment and say, I apologize for what I said previously, I was wrong. Probably don't hear that too often. And just as a lesson for all of us, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do on our part. Like, we didn't handle this as well as we could, and we were wrong, and we put out information that was not in line with the actions that we took. So as a general idea, coming from a leadership education background, that first question is, what am I doing to make the situation more difficult, and how could I do better? If we all keep that in mind, a lot of times we'll have a lot better interpersonal relationships. And even looking at this kind of situation, looking back at it, we call this a hot wash in the military. Maybe we use that in civilian world too. Of what's the hot wash here? How did we handle this? Was there good enough communication between the superintendent and the rest of the staff to know exactly what was going on? The last thing, Dr. Breslin, if you're standing up here and you know that something that's being said, that we're saying, that I'm saying is not factually true, I'd like you to raise your hand and say, Mr. Tatum, I know that what you're saying is not factually true because of a document or whatever. So at least from my perspective, please don't hesitate to clarify something. If it's a judgment call, I understand you're not wanting to contradict your superintendent in public, but if it's something that's obviously not factually true as opposed to a little judgment call, at least from my perspective, please raise your hand and be called on. That might have avoided the whole issue in the first place. And I think I went a minute or two
Well, I
over.
certainly appreciate the feedback, and we'll make sure that when we share memos that are shared with the superintendent, Pat Barber, we make sure we're inclusive of everyone, so everyone's on the same page. It's certainly an opportunity for improvement.
If we could have gotten that too, like if you send out a big policy change like this, why not just put the school board members on it too? And that way we can see it. And,
Right. So we send it to Mrs. Saunders, and then
her decision whether.
her decision to share, and I'll continue to do that.
Great. Thank you.
But I'm all for correcting Mr. Tatum if he's wrong, okay?
Hey, feedback is great in any way that you get it.
I
That's the
agree.
reason.
We all can do better. Thank you.
10 minutes, 10 minutes.
I also, just for the record, I've had several people ask me for the statistics that I asked you for on Tuesday. I've also heard the words mass exodus. I guess my question is, on Friday, I'd like a percentage. I'd like a percentage of how many books out of the millions I'm going to perceive that we have, because I did some math and it's probably in the millions, that would be my guess, of books that we have now, cataloged, maybe not all cataloged. I would like to know a percentage of how many have been to be inappropriate. I would like that on Friday, if you can, because is it weeds or is it a mass exodus? I think that frame of reference would be helpful to me on Tuesday. So I just, either you can read them out or I can, because I just want to make sure that gets put out to the record, because there were lots of people that have reached out since then saying, I would like to know that number, and I want to make sure they get that number. Now I'm going to try and find out my email unless you have it. Let me find it. 'Cause I don't have it. 10 minutes, 10 minutes. I also, just for the record, I've had several people ask me for the statistics that I asked you for on Tuesday. I've also heard the words mass exodus. I guess my question is, on Friday, I'd like a percentage of how many have been to be inappropriate. I would like to know a percentage of how many books out of the millions I'm going to perceive that we have now, maybe not all cataloged. That would be my guess, of books that we have now,
I don't have it readily in front of me, but I can tell you for the total, you have it in front of you?
No, but I remember it being like 0.01.
0.01% of our total titles of books have been sent in for reconsideration,
That's 1/100th of 1%.
and 0.004 were placed either with parent consent or removed.
So that's 0.004 of 1%.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just wanted to put them out because I had several people that really would like to know those numbers, and I wanted to make sure the community knew that.
And I said to Tuesday that it was my decision to push this presentation back to this workshop instead of 2 weeks ago on the 17th. We could have had it then. And I think that would have brought a lot more clarity to what's moving forward, to what's happened this past week. I think it brought a lot more clarity to that situation. And, you know, hindsight's 20/20. I wish now that we'd had this workshop 2 weeks ago on the 17th. And I said Tuesday, I'll take that blame, and I'll take it today, and I'll take it forever. I think that if we'd had this discussion beforehand and it would have been out in the public and the teachers, etc., I don't think we'd have had so much reaction what we did. There's still going to be people that disagree with what we're doing.
Sure.
That's not the issue. But I think that we could that looking back, I definitely could have kept it on the workshop, and I moved it because I thought something was more important than what this was, and that was a miscalculation on my part, and I'll admit it. So, and that's the way we should be. We should look back and reflect. Hey, can we do things differently?
Yeah,
and
we
better?
constantly strive to improve, to better support our schools. That's why we're here.